Thank you very much, Chris. Normally, Indigenous Language Institute would not be presenting at its own symposium that we organized. So, but we felt this was important because it is a project that we believe could be very useful for many, many communities. And because the timing, we just completed publishing edition 1, and I emphasize edition 1 of that workbook. So I know we're only half filled, and as people start coming in, we will actually begin the presentation. But I'm going to be helped by our president of the board, Gerald L, and when we're really, really ready to roll, we will be here and he'll just say, and I will let him talk. So, as some of you have seen, the workbooks are available during this conference in limited numbers. And because this is edition 1, we are expecting feedback and further polishing of the content, etc. So those of you who have already very kindly purchased these, please, this is an announcement for those who have purchased these. Please go back to the table where you got them and give us your contact information. Because part of the reason we want this to be distributed in limited numbers today is to get feedback. So if you've looked at it, if you've actually used it, we really would like to hear from you. So we can make the final edition a very, very complete workbook. Okay, well, we will start, and hopefully people will start coming in over this. We're going to push to change the slides. So, yeah. Thank you very much. So this workbook, actually, and the project is called How Do I Say? And it's a learner-driven method for learning languages. So what is learner-driven language learning method? It's really modeled after the most natural way, probably the most ancient way in which we get interested in learning languages. We really used to, and we still do, learn our languages from our moms, our dads, families, grandparents, and as babies we just learn them. And it is by observation with absorption. But as we become adults, it's out of desire or necessity. And it's language that would be useful for me that I would like to learn. So as a child, it used to be this, means I'm hungry. But then when you start to learn to speak, you say, hungry. Or you would start to say, I'm hungry, I want food. Desire, necessity. And it's very relevant. I've got to fulfill this need right now. Another example I usually talk about is if you're going to a foreign country, you're going to need to know some words and phrases for survival. So maybe I should put survival in there somewhere. And who do we turn to? We turn to the speakers. We turn to people we know that know this language. And we are persistent. And we have a system in our head like, I gotta learn this because I want to. So I'm gonna do this every time I see her or him. And there's a certain method, meaning I'm gonna jot down everything if it's a written language. Or I will record it with permission. Or I will try to remember, I will practice every day. So there's a method. Maybe we're not aware of it, but there's certainly a method. A very, very funny example is, I'm Korean, but I was born and raised in Japan, went to the American school in Japan. So my first language sort of quickly became English. So English is my language. So my friends and I are taking the train to school and we're yakking away in English. Undoubtedly, every day somebody will come up and say, "Can I practice with you?" Because in Japan, to know English is such an important part of either their student life or work life. So they're very persistent. And if you've ever traveled in Asia, has anybody traveled in Asia? Okay, if they hear you speaking English, they'll come right up to you and say, "Can you talk to me for a few minutes?" Anyway, so here, how do I say thank you? And the young man is saying, "Wado," in Cherokee. Who can use this learner-driven language learning method? Schools. Let's say there are many students with different languages, and are you going to hire, therefore, 15 language teachers? It's difficult. So schools with that situation, tribal language programs to help increase the community participation. I'll explain all this later why. Families to bring language back into the homes. And individuals who want to learn heritage, their language. Some of them may be living outside of their homes in different parts of the country. Teachers, so that they can focus on student learning rather than being busy with lesson planning and actually teaching the language. And speakers, we're talking about the fluent speakers, proficient speakers, to become involved in the nation's language revitalization work. So how do I say? It's the way we designed it, it's for school use, because part of our research over the years, which resulted in the two things, plus many others, but we really have to listen to communities, visit with them, and find out what is it that is considered your challenge. And we found that in many schools, tribal schools or BIE schools, especially where the student body comes from different communities. As a tribal school, you want to teach the native language, but if you do have like 15 languages represented in your student body, that gets challenging. So they typically have offered one language or two languages, or maybe sometimes three. And all the rest, they're on their own. And if I may, I would like to mention that Santa Fe Indian School here in New Mexico have a very similar situation. Their student body comes from 22 tribes in New Mexico, and plus those who live here from other parts of the country. So they're dealing with a lot of languages. So our conversation with them became very, very clear that there's something we need to do about this. Oh, and the other part is, after 10 years of teaching my language classes, they're not able to speak yet. We heard that a lot. And we wanted to help kind of shift that into, in that same amount of time, we will hopefully have, not hopefully, but we will have speakers. So I kind of like what Tony said, use what you got and it will help you learn more. You know, so everything I'm hearing in this conference is really helpful. So learner-driven means that the learner leads the learning. So here's the driver in the car with the assistant navigator, or whatever you call it, on the side, but the learner actually has to drive the car. So this translates into, if I'm a learner, I will choose who I want to learn with. And it's usually going to be a friend, a family member, or somebody I know who knows the language well. That person, we call it the mentor, isn't going to be necessarily a language teacher or a certified language instructor. It could be anybody. Doesn't that increase the number of human resources that we can turn to? Part of the importance of thinking about this differently. The mentor, therefore, does not need to be certified, licensed, or degreed to teach the language. They only have to know the language. But the most important thing is they have to be willing to be a mentor to me. If they say, oh, I'm too busy, no, I don't like you, oh, that's my tough luck, but I will find something else. So that willingness. And there's a whole art to how this relationship will work. So again, this is the book, the cover of the book, the workbook. It's in a binder so that it's easy to use, easy to put in your own notes, and easy for anybody to find things. And I can't show, I don't know why, but when I scanned some pages to show, it didn't come out right, so bear with me. So the workbook, and there are samples in the back table so you can take a look. It will not have, like, if we're talking about a topic of greetings, it will not have, these are things you must learn. We're going to study these words, or phrases, or sentences. It offers ideas of what would help you as a learner. So, for example, in greetings, it would say, well, many cultures do it differently. What's your cultural greeting? What's appropriate to your culture? What are some of the mannerisms that go with the greeting? You probably know in Japan it's, you know, Ohio, konnichiwa, things like that. So what are some of that go with the greetings? So it just gives ideas and situations that will help the learner start to think about how do we tackle this topic. And guess what? It's the learner's responsibility to ask the mentor, these are things I want to learn, how do you say it? That's why we call this workbook, how do I say it? The learner instigates the questions, and then they will choose the expressions that are relevant to that person or the situation they're in. So as a table of contents, we have a terrific creative team of advisors. We came up with a wonderful layout, which is, it's very hard to see, but it's a circular table of contents. So there's no linear, this is how you have to follow order. You can go from the center of it to any place you want to go for that week, for that day. So these are the main topics. Getting started, about me, things we do, greetings, relations, food, school or work, time. And as an example, I picked about me, which is the main topic. And underneath about me, there are introducing myself, my hobbies, my friends, pets, what I like and dislike, emotions and physical state, describing physical characteristics, and my goals. And this is where I want feedback. When people start using this or reviewing it, I would love to hear more about what are some of the very, very generic but important topics that we could include in future editions. So as a subtopic, let's take describing physical characteristics. In many lesson plans, typically this is called body parts. So instead of simply listing and naming and learning words for our physical makeup, a suggestion is take a friend or take yourself and describe the different parts. So it's no longer head, nose, hand, arm. It's like, this is my head, and this is, you know, Patrick's hand. So we're trying to encourage full sentence use. Or create a story that describes movement. Create flashcards. If you're an artist, just go ahead and create the flashcards, and that becomes useful for your practice, but also you can share that with others. So as an example in that page, Sheila's practicing Zumba. Who does Zumba? I knew they were going to be good for you. Yay! Zumba, for those of you who don't know, it's like great dancing and it's exercise, but it's fun. So explain what you do in Zumba class. So this is very simple. Raise your right arm to the side, lift it over the head, bend at waist, repeat with left arm. So you're actually describing a situation, but you're also learning the different body parts. So what have we learned? Full sentences, vocabulary for body parts, but we're also learning verbs. Maybe commands, like lift your hand. So all these things are incorporated into that one lesson. An interesting and a very important part, this is what we learned from the young people. When we talked to the youth, they said, oh, I like my language class, but you know, I don't use what I learn in there. But I really want to learn how to say, hey, did you see that? Punch it. Hey, let's go for bowling. Let's go hang out at the mall. Whatever it is that they want to learn is not being taught in class. So they go, so I ain't going back anymore. So this is from the youth, but I hear it also from adults. So here's a page or what we are typically familiar with as a lesson, where it's a pick my topic. So let's say under About Me, I pick a topic about, oh, in my case, I might say where I was born, where I was raised. That's not in the workbook, but you get to choose. And then what would that be for you? I mean, everybody. So we shall see how that works. This is new for us too. But we thought if you give this option, amazing things could happen. So as we said, this was designed for school use. So let's say there's a class of learners who come from like 5 different languages. So in a classroom of 20, there are 5 different languages. There's going to need to be a coordinator, much like a teacher managing a classroom, making sure the projects are done, making sure that they're on track, making sure the people who need to know what their scores are or whatever it is, progress reports are being sent to the right people. So this is called the coordinator. It could be a teacher, it could be a staff person. It does not have to be a certified or experienced language teacher per se, although it's preferred that they are interested in the language learning. She or he is the point person for each learner who has a mentor in their homes or community. Or it could be that teacher. They can come up and say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, can you be my mentor? Sure, for that language. So there's a lot of communication that has to happen between the mentor and the communities, from the learners, and to coordinate all of that. And for assessment, for evaluation, all of those things that schools require. So we want to talk about now the role of a mentor. We describe who that might be, but actually the main difference between mentor and teacher is the difference of roles and responsibilities. So if you are a language teacher, I'll just take myself. If I'm teaching Japanese, and if I am a certified teacher, if somebody wants to say, well, that's the language I want to learn, can you be my mentor? I simply switch my role. Because with this method, I don't have to prepare lessons and teach the language. I'm there as a source of language information. They're there going to say, how do you say this? How do you say that? So the mentor role it really has the advantage of a one-on-one or 1 to 2 or 3 teams of learners, working relationship. The mentor must be proficient or fluent in the language. I emphasize proficient because if you're not fluent, that's okay, because you hopefully have people you can turn to learn more about the language. It does not, or she does not require a degree, certificate, or teaching experience. Does not require preparing of lessons or curriculum. Emphasis, learner drives the learning. The teacher role is usually working with students in the classroom and would have to be fluent or proficient in the language, which is kind of similar. Requires a degree, certificate, or teaching experience, and is going to be developing curriculum, lesson plans, and other teaching materials. And teacher drives the learning. There's a lot of research, which I don't have time to go into, but part of our research was how does this work and what are some of the outcomes from it? And there's some really, really positive research results. We didn't speak much about the learner, but I think you know who the learner is. Okay, so we will skip that. There's a little bit of a role, or a large role, of technology. We encourage recording as you're having sessions with your mentor. The learner records audio, visual, whatever is important to you. Now, these days, it's so easy. You could do it on your smartphone. You could actually purchase very high-quality voice recording systems. Then you need to store that somewhere. And right now, in my hand is the laptop, where you can store the data, and then you organize the data. And what we recommend is software called Mirola, which is developed by the Australian Aboriginal Organization for Language. Once you store it in there, from it you can produce your own personal phrase book, dictionary, flashcards, and not particularly through Mirola, but you can have all the data you need to create digital formats of stories in your language. And I can't go into Mirola too much because it's a lesson in itself. It's a presentation in itself. Also, you get to share. You get to share what you produce, what you store, and work with other friends, colleagues. I forgot to mention practice, practice, practice. So having recordings obviously is going to help you practice. And that's kind of an important part. So we're using some new terminology. I don't know if you know this, but we're not calling this the learner students anymore. Not in this method. Students have a sense, sort of an image of being in a classroom and passively receiving information. So we're calling them learners. So student becomes learner. Teacher is no longer really teaching, but it has the more larger role as a mentor. It's no longer teacher-centered, which means you're not walking into a classroom where the teacher has an agenda, but the agenda is driven by the learner-centered. No longer the prescribed lessons of this is a dog, this is a book, where is the book, to things that the learner wants to learn. And instead of a continuous series of lesson plans, you have a chance to stop and say, this is what I want to learn. Pick your topic. So these are some of the shifts. We're trying to see if the shifting in a very methodical, practical way would be helpful. So I'm at the end of my presentation, which is acknowledgements, and we wanted to thank ANA, which back in 2009, 2010, we got a one-year grant to develop and test a prototype. These were tested tested by 5 youth. And yesterday at the raffle, 2 people won the DVD, The Young Ancestors, that talks about that process. Anonymous donor who provided us a 2-year grant for 2013 and 2014 to fully develop this into today's format. And then in 2014, from your feedback, we will hone and polish this into a final edition. And then the project advisory team, Gerald L, Joshua Hinson, Laura Jagels, Laura, yay. Ophelia Zepeda. They've been very helpful, and really the whole design changed thanks to their creative and very experienced input. And I also want to acknowledge those who are participating in the pilot project. Without them, this would not have happened. And Pueblo Fuake, so Governor Rivera, the Director of Education of the Fuake Pueblo, Alicia Rivera, Jim Leonard from Santa Fe Prep School, where the students who tested this were attending. And Laura Jangles, she was the one that the students selected, said, Ms. J, can you be our mentor? And she agreed, thankfully. Jeremy, David, Jordan, Marissa, Joaquin, the 5 Tewa learners from different communities. Benedita Naramo, my dear Benedita, she's probably today she's about 99 or 100. Maybe I'm giving her too many years in advance, but she's very elderly, but she was so excited to see her great grandchildren get so excited about learning. And this was one thing we found. Once you give them the keys to